Industrial real estate has been the shining star for commercial real estate for the last 2 years despite interest rates going up. Watch this video if you want to learn how to transition from multifamily investment over to industrial triple net commercial real estate. Industrial serves a variety of users, from local manufacturers, plumbers, electricians, warehouse distribution, and my personal favorite, truck parking. These businesses all still need to continue no matter what the economy is doing. People still need to eat, and it's not as sensitive to luxury Class A multifamily. So in this video, I'm going to outline the 3 major tips that I find as a commercial real estate attorney. I see a lot of multifamily investors transitioning to industrial, and these are the top 3 tips that I think investors need to understand what they do know, and sometimes they don't know what they don't know. Industrial real estate is slow and steady. In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to succeed from a transition from multifamily over to industrial. There has never been a time in the real estate market like the last 5 years. Over $1 trillion have been invested in multifamily, and every successive investment brings higher prices per door, higher rent assumptions, and the only thing that can happen is eventually there was going to be a pop. We did see that pop with real estate taxes going up. We saw insurance premiums skyrocketing, and we even saw rents declining in a few markets. Investors ended up taking on more risk for lower returns, and sometimes even a combination of the two. But savvy investors saw the writing on the wall and were looking at other asset classes to deploy their capital. I'm going to walk through the top 3 main differences between multifamily or residential investment and industrial triple net investment. This should give you a framework so that you can start looking at properties and identify fits for your buy box. Number 1, the biggest change is the lease. Now, for most multifamily or residential investors, they're going to be operating off of a gross lease. What that means is the tenant signs a lease and they typically will pay one flat rate each month, and they get access to their apartment and they get those amenities kind of regardless of what the outstanding market does. With the exception of electricity or maybe internet, there's really just a fixed fee for the landlord, and the 2 biggest expenses for any real estate piece of property is real estate property taxes, maybe management, and insurance premiums. Those are borne by the landlord kind of regardless of what the tenants do or regardless of vacancy. However, in a triple net lease, the tenant still does pay a base rent, and they're going to pay that base rent, but then they also pay additional charges. And the first net is net of real property taxes. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what's included in those real property charges, whether there's late fees, whether there's costs for protests, but suffice to say that the bulk of real estate taxes that are charged to a landowner get passed through to the tenant, and the tenant reimburses the landlord for those expenses. Number 2, same thing for insurance premiums. Any out-of-pocket cost that the landlord pays towards insurance, the tenant is going to reimburse them for those amounts. And so in that regard, it's a huge shift in mindset, because with these fixed returns, the landlord knows that even if a year in the future, if premiums double, their expenses are not going to double. That's a cap on your downside risk. However, triple net leases tend to be longer, 3, 5, even 10 years long. And so there's also a cap on your upside. In my same scenario, if you sign that 5-year lease in year 2, if the market rents double, the tenant is going to enjoy the benefit of that locked in lease, and you're not going to be able to raise their rent until the end of their term or when they renew. The number 2 challenge or change is really dealing with businesses and not consumers. You're going to rely less on creativity and the vibe check to create value. There's nothing wrong with either path, but it's important to understand which property requires which approach. And you're going to be successful no matter what, but understand that these are businesses as industrial tenants. They're looking at function, they're looking at utility, and they're going to make a non-emotional decision versus apartments. You tend to cultivate a certain desirability to be in that complex, and there are things that you can do in the lobby, in the common areas, the pool, to create a very inviting environment that makes people want to be there and that can generate premium rents. In addition, these businesses now have higher expectations. You're dealing with Fortune 500 companies, you're dealing with people that take this very seriously, and they're going to have high expectations in terms of their business partners. And as a landlord, you're included in that category. So they may ask you different systems for how you process accounting. How do you handle property level complaints? Do you have a legal team? Who's your accountant? Do you timely provide year-end tax statements? These are all important questions, and a lot of these tenants don't want to deal with an inexperienced investor. They would rather go with a tried and true landlord that seems professional and organized. So it's critical to understand how these answers fit into your commitment to industrial real estate. These aren't amateurs, and when given a choice, they prefer dealing with professionals who are confident and have the experience to back up those answers. My number 3 change is property inspections as well as zoning. I kind of merge the two. But typically in multifamily, when you do a property walkthrough, you're looking at everything. Every part of the property is subject to some type of CapEx budget or some type of renovation cost eventually. And it's a big difference from industrial, because when I walk through a property, I'm an industrial investor, I own lots of properties, I look for things that I'm responsible for fixing. And that's typically limited to the exterior of the building, maybe some HVAC, just because it's a high ticket item, but the roof is the biggest area that I'm looking for. I want to look for functional dock doors, maybe dock levelers, any big systems, foundation, that sort of thing. But the point is, when you're walking multifamily, I think you have your eye on almost every part of the building. And for industrial, you don't need to do that. You need to have a little bit more of a laser focus. At the same time, understanding what are the systems that I do need to spend money on when there's a vacancy, and what would be required for TI if a tenant vacates during the middle of the lease. So assuming you're buying a building that has an existing lease in place, you don't have to worry too much about the existing condition of the property. You don't have to go over with a fine-tooth comb. And that's a big difference from multifamily, where you may be budgeting to do all this CapEx. It's strictly not necessary in industrial real estate. The major systems of a metal building is the roof, HVAC, dock doors, levelers, plumbing, electrical, foundation, the truck court, fencing, and maybe office refresh and paint the exterior. For tilt wall and other construction styles that utilize a flat roof, it's critical to inspect the roof and pay for a third-party inspection and budget accordingly. This is the biggest area of financial mistakes, is not properly allocating. If you have a flat roof, it is guaranteed to leak. It's not a question of if, it's only a question of when. Finally, zoning does come up in multifamily, but I feel like my clients buying multifamily only do this as a pass-fail. Is this area zoned for multifamily? Yes or no? And if it is, great, we're going to proceed. However, in industrial, it is a lot more nuanced. For example, in a flex business park, it may be zoned commercial. And all of the existing tenants may fit, but if you have an automotive user applying, they're not going to get a CO and they're not going to be permitted to operate in a commercially zoned area. So it's important to understand as you're backfilling what your available pool of tenants is and how this space is functional for them and how much rent they would pay. In addition, even if you're in an industrial area and even if the existing tenant is approved in that area, you want to know what the approved uses are if that tenant vacates, or when they do leave, what are your options for other tenants. And just because you're in an industrial area, you might be approved for assembly, but you're not approved for heavy manufacturing. You may not be allowed to have outdoor storage. You couldn't have stacked containers, for example. And so you've really got to dig into the zoning code and understand, is this a heavy industrial area? Is this light industrial? Is this even commercial? Is this more of a flex? But the zoning is critical, and I think people don't spend enough time looking into the zoning of a prospective property to understand really what the upside or what the future rents should be. And Industrial real estate may be a great fit for multifamily investors who see the current market there as a little bit saturated and not generating great yields. So if you can put together a team and you can start looking at a narrow subset of industrial properties, I think there's a lot of yield to be made investing in industrial. Industrial demand is not slowing down. With the increase of nearshoring and reshoring, industrial demand is just going to continue to increase. So if you're still watching, smash that like button. Check out my community, Invest in Truck Parking, where I provide monthly deal underwriting, and I'm going to help you buy truck parking lots.